kind of make a little diversion and dive in a little bit more into the clientele we're working with and solidify some of our thinking about working with adolescents, the human species teenager, and all the challenges therein, and how we manifest some ideas in our instruction and in our classroom organization. But for now, let's go ahead and start debriefing on this article. I invite you all to come in and share your screens and put your view on gallery view so you can see everybody. And let's hear a volunteer for a paraphrase from the article. Who'd like to share one? Okay, Elizabeth, I see you there.
Yeah, my paraphrase is just saying that this selection was basically about the lack of engagement that students have presently and that resulting desire to drop out of school, and it has a call to action for improving engagement in the classroom, making real-world applications, and then therefore lowering the dropout rate.
Okay, great. Just like you talked about in your math situation, right? Would you pick another person to give a paraphrase?
Sure. Does anyone want to do it, or am I just going to have to randomly? Taylor, go for it.
Okay, Taylor. There you go.
For my paraphrase, I said teachers who use specific instructional strategies to engage students in the material and consider all external factors that impact a student's academic achievement.
Okay, thank you very much. Would you pick someone to share a word? And if you want to share, just raise your hand or make a gesture and she can call on you.
Cassandra.
Cassandra, there you go.
A word that I chose was technology. And the reason I chose this word was because it kind of stood out to me how it mentions how technology is so advanced now. So we can't tell our students what teachers would tell us, like you need to learn how to multiply, divide, whatever the case may be, because you're not going to have a calculator at hand with you at all times. But these students literally do with their phones. So we as teachers are forced to innovate our teachings to avoid the infamous question of when will we ever really need this?
Yeah, and that might be a good segue into finding real world examples too that you can come up with to get them basically out of the classroom and into the application. Thank you. I see Leah has a hand up.
Yes, a word that I chose was relevant. I chose this because this is one of the reasons students are not engaged in lessons. If the students do not feel that there is a purpose behind a particular lesson that is relevant to them, then they probably will not retain the information or engage in the lesson at all.
So somehow making those connections is important, and that's where I think this is really the art of teaching, is to make those connections apparent. And we'll try to share some strategies that make that happen. Thank you. Would you pick another person to share another word?
I can share. I'll just pick someone from my group. Karen, you had a good word.
Right. So, the one that I chose here was growth mindset. So it's positive attitude and approach to living and learning. I can't do this because I can't do this yet. Adding a simple word change into this changes this into a goal one is willing to work towards, but one is going to keep trying until one finds success. It's a crucial piece to teaching, as so many students want to believe that they are not worthy or not smart enough. It is constantly helping them to reframe their mistakes and missteps as a positive step towards the end goal. Mistakes are an opportunity to learn more and not less.
Okay. So something about changing the mindset that they can't do it, and somehow creating an avenue for them to to get into the material and to be successful is important. Thank you. Would you pick somebody to share an idea from that second to the last box? If you want to share, just raise your hand.
Ready? Marisol?
Thing. How we can help students develop all of the skills that have been listed, like cognitive flexibility, problem solving, and decision. To help them develop those skills, but also able to see how we can help them develop all of the teaching the content that's relevant. Like, how do you create lessons that teach them the material while also
Are you still driving? I think we lost Marisol. Okay, let me just echo something here. Sometimes it's not always the what we're teaching, but how we're teaching it that can change the game. And we're going to start talking more about that in the next couple of weeks too. So that's something that's a good point of departure. Okay, somebody else care to share an idea from that second to the last box? I don't know if Marisol's back. Okay, Kelia.
Yeah, so this reading selection, actually, I have a younger brother who's 15 years old, and he's in high school right now. And we went out to dinner on Wednesday night, and he was telling me that one of his teachers he actually really likes because she'll give them a practice quiz before class, and it has different problems that are like review problems, and then at the end of the class she'll give them a real quiz with similar problems but slightly different. And he said that it really helps him because they get to review the problems, and then just at the end of class they have this other quiz to do. And he was saying that the lowest grade ever received on this quiz was 6 out of 10. And just the way he was talking about it, he seemed like he was really like excited and interested in the class almost, which he usually isn't like that with school. He never talks about school. So I don't know. It was just really interesting to hear him talk about this one teacher who like helps him with school, and he actually gets good grades and it engages the students. So yeah, this article just reminded me of that conversation with him.
Yeah, it reminded me of our last night quick write too, about the active learning idea and how we talked about that idea as well. Okay, thank you. Would you pick someone to share an implication for our teaching?
Would anyone like to share? Anyone want to raise a hand?
Just go ahead and grab somebody.
All right. Michael, you want to share the implication?
Sure. Whoops. It's just a thought I had around, I don't know if this is directly related to the article, but it's where my mind went about having students in my class who have zero belief that they can actually pass. And this language that I use, you don't have to learn anything to, well, I tell them this, you don't have to learn anything to pass my class. All you have to do is show up and I will pass you. And I do it to meet them where they are so that I at least have the opportunity to build up their belief before they just stop showing up. And so this article really reminded me to, like, I always feel weird when I say that but it was a reminder and it was validation to meet them where they are. Because if I don't build up that belief, then I'll never have a shot at them again. Because my students are old enough where they can walk out.
Well, the other thing that's interesting too is that you provide an element of choice. And, you know, with that choice is some degree of commitment. And I think that that's what's working here. At least I'm assuming it's working. So
Sometimes.
so once you capture them, you know, then you've got a chance with them. So that's kind of where that goes. So that's good. Okay, let's hear one more implication. We'd like to share one. If not, Michael can call on you. Okay, Michael, go ahead and pick someone.
Oh, I see my old colleague, Cassandra. Cassandra, can I bug you to?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Something that kind of stood out to me was it kind of made me reflect on myself, and it's the fact that I focus so much on like quizzes and tests and like to make them perform well. But this kind of made me reflect and made me want to maybe not do as many quizzes and maybe exchange those quizzes for projects so that they can have a chance to be hands-on with the math and create a project with their team members, which is also discussed in the article. So this just kind of made me reflect and made me want to start doing more projects, which I've never done before.
Okay. Let's meet up when you're ready to do that, because there's some things about projects that you should be aware of. Are you student teaching or are you in a regular classroom?
No, I'm an intern right now.
Intern. Okay. All right. So you'll get some guidance from your mentor teacher then. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Very good. So let's go ahead and put our quick writes. You'll drop them into your Google folder at the end of class. And we're going to go ahead and move on here. And the idea behind this quick write is we kind of start diving into wanting to know more about the clientele and ways that we can create that magic word of engagement as we go through. So the article gave you some interesting ideas. The other point is when we talk about noticing that the intrinsic motivation that the conditions for intrinsic motivation can be something that we have to give consideration to, and we're going to be working on some ideas around that as well. So a couple of things that we know challenge us. First of all, we know that for the most part, Common Core is here. It may not be everywhere, but certainly it's prevalent in a lot of places. And there's some important shifts to consider as we dive into some of the Common Core curriculum. One is there's more of a prominent role of nonfiction reading through text triangulation, as well as an increase in nonfiction writing across all disciplines. So there are a couple of implications here. One is, and some people freaked out when they thought that 75% of the reading kids had to do during the day was expository or informational. And English teachers freaked out. Fact of the matter is that we're already doing 75% of informational text reading. The point is, I think that particularly for English teachers too, that when we introduce material that gives context to the works that they're reading, if we introduce materials to provide context for anything we're doing in any discipline, whether it's the history of a sport or the civilization that it came from or something like that, we can add more depth and create more relevance to what it is that kids are learning. Because, again, they can connect it to background knowledge. The second shift would be a greater emphasis on helping kids build thinking habits rather than just memorizing content, facts, and figures. And here, as we said before, we make a distinction between being able to recall a fact versus being able to recall the fact that's been acquired based upon deeper understanding. So we can do recall that sometimes looks like memorization, but if the student has acquired the information, that it looks the same, but it's actually far different. And that We know that just simply learning facts and lists of words will disappear shortly after any kind of test is given, if not beforehand. And then a third emphasis is placed on text and text-based answers, backing up their thoughts through the author's arguments and logic. Here, we separate fact from opinion. Now, the opinion may be reflected in terms of the author's opinion, but we want that to be basically what we call an evidence-based inquiry, where they're actually using and applying ideas from the text to either disagree and refute something, or to agree with it and support it with information. So these are shifts that indicate a deeper need for understanding. Again, the disparity is in terms of the background knowledge that kids have and their ability to know the new information. And again, the new rigorous standards in education advocates like the ACT have placed a greater emphasis than ever on the level of challenge or complexity presented by the text kids are reading. They emphasize that students should encounter increasingly complex text to prepare for future demands, including post-secondary schooling and workplace settings, an area prior research has established where there exists a substantial gap in text difficulty. So by requiring students to access grade level text, we're kicking up the notch of the complexity that kids are reading and trying to get them beyond ninth grade text, which is typically where kids live in typical high schools. Now, there was an op-ed that came out last year that I thought was really interesting, and this gets us into our IQ. The Twitter of that started this was a father's writing on a tweet that his daughter, who was I think maybe 4 or 5 years old, asked him to open a can of I don't know, string beans or something, and he gave her a can opener and he said, "Do it yourself, figure it out." And so it raised kind of a furor in the fact that there was an expectation that the student will somehow discover a way to utilize this this can opener, and eventually she got there. It took a while for her to figure it out, but eventually she did. But Daniel Willingham, who wrote the Quick Write, How to Get Your Mind to Read, had a response. But he says in a recent survey, 82% of teachers endorsed the statement, students learn best by finding solutions to problems on their own. Well, there are some caveats to this that I think we need to explore. Research tells a more complicated story. Guidance is critical. If kids are given a problem to solve or a frog to dissect with few instructions, they learn much less than they would if they had been given an explanation. With skillful hints, however, learning from problems and activities can be equivalent, perhaps even a bit better than learning from lecture. But the most intriguing is solving problems makes learning deeper isn't necessarily true. And this kind of gets into some of the controversy around the IQ that we have for tonight, which we'll explore a little later. Predictably, more kids learn when instructed. More surprising, those who did learn via their own exploration didn't show especially deep learning as measured by their ability to apply this knowledge to new problems. So again, it's sort of the argument some parents have, discovery or guided instruction. I can never tell if I'm allowing independent play or just ignoring her. And there's something kind of in a subtext there that we need to consider in terms of our own instruction. But sparking curiosity with guided problem solving isn't easy. With weak hints, kids are frustrated and hints that are too strong or really explanations. It may be that researchers find that kids love problems because coming up with good hints isn't easy for teachers. Well, so how much is too much and how little is too little is the balancing act that we have to deal with. The difficulty of creating just right hints may explain why, even though teachers say that kids learn best by solving problems, in classrooms teachers often choose to explain. Why? Because they sense that kids get frustrated and may not have the requisite information to be able to carry forth that so-called discovery. So this leads us to some discussion about differentiation and what it looks like at the secondary level. We know that for secondary students, about 70% of our middle and high school students require some sort of differentiated instruction, which is targeted to their individual strengths and weaknesses. Now, in an elementary setting, it's a little bit different because you have 25 or so kids, you have them all day, and you can actually create, in a slight variation, individual parts of a lesson plan to differentiate instruction. In secondary ed, you can't do that. You have 175 students or so. You cannot write 175 different lesson plans. So there's some broad considerations we can make with respect to differentiation at the secondary level. Because again, our challenge is how do we balance when we have so many different levels? And that's an ongoing issue that we're always going to confront. So let's get a definition. The process of identifying the student's individual learning strengths, needs, and interests and adapting lessons to match them. Again, it's different in elementary than it is in secondary because you have a lot fewer students and you spend more time with them. In secondary, it's more of a broader reach in terms of how we create different components of our instruction to meet the needs of a wider range of students. So some key elements of this include process, how students come to understand or make sense of the content. And so what do we need to ask students to do to help them practice and how and what they learn? That's basically where we begin planning our instruction in terms of not only what we're going to do in terms of instruction, but the other side of the coin is what they're going to do. And that's the product. What will students generate either in a single lesson or an accumulative task that demonstrates understanding and application of the content? In other words, they have to deliver something to let us document their understanding or lack of understanding to ensure that if they don't understand, we have to somehow take steps to get them there. Of course, affect plays a big part in it in terms of students' emotional readiness and feelings, in terms of their motivation to learn, and how do we engage them in a stimulated environment. Active learning, for example, may be one of those ways that we can differentiate, believe it or not, but it creates a greater condition for motivation. And we're going to be looking at motivation more in depth in next week's IQ. And then, of course, readiness, which is tied to motivation, rather than see this as a disability, it can be a temporary condition that changes with effective teaching. So, again, when students ask us, when are we going to ever need this? That's an indication of a lack of readiness. Somehow we have to figure out how to make the connection creatively so that we can create those scaffolds in the lessons that we teach our students. That's the hard part of teaching, by the way. It's how do we meet all those needs of such a diverse group? And there are ways I think we can do it if we're smart about it. And one of the biggest factors in successful differentiation is peer-to-peer student discussion. And we're going to talk more about that as well. So in terms of something that you might be familiar with, which is UDL, Universal Design for Learning, this creates more options for students in terms of demonstrating their understanding. So it's a set of principles for curriculum development that give all students, individuals, equal opportunities to learn, and provides a blueprint for creating instructional goals, methods, materials, and assessments that work for everyone, not a single one-size-fits-all solution, but rather flexible approaches that can be customized and adjusted for individual needs. So it may be that for some students, a paper-pencil test would be good. Other students may have other ways of sharing their understanding through a PowerPoint or some other video presentation. There are options now that are more open to us than were previously used. So again, basically, it's a scientifically valid framework for guiding practice. flexibility in the ways information is presented, the way students respond or demonstrate knowledge, and the ways the students are engaged. Part of this implies you're moving away from strict lecture, but getting kids into more interactive scenarios where they're more engaged with each other. Sometimes students can be the best source for checking understanding to other students. Also, the idea is to reduce barriers in instruction and provides appropriate accommodations, supports, and challenges, and maintains achievement expectations for all students, including students with disabilities and students who are LEP or limited English proficient. So, again, if we think in terms of the classroom as we see it, there are different opportunities for interaction among students that I think provide the strongest potential for not only UDL, but for differentiation. So the question we have to ask ourselves now, based on these ideas, is now what? So would you do me a favor? I'd like you all to unmute, and on the count of 3, I want you to wake your neighbors up and shout as loud as you can, now what? Ready? 1, 2, 3.
No.
Now what?
Yeah, let's do that one more time with a little more brio, okay? Wake them up, I said. 1, 2, 3.
Now
Okay. Well, we'll practice that a little bit more for next time. Okay. Let me just say that there is light at the end of the tunnel. And that we can somehow figure out ways to work with this. And I know this is just so wrong, but I can't help it. But you do get the idea. This is not fine. So, some of you are familiar with the term growth mindset. Anybody not familiar with this term? I can't see you all, so if you just give me a sign in your block. Okay, so some of you have had experience with this before, so that's good. Okay, so let's define terms for the good of the cause. A mindset, according to Carol Dweck, is a self-perception or self-theory that people hold about themselves. Believing that you are either intelligent or unintelligent is a simple example of a mindset. People may also have a mindset related to their personal or professional lives. I'm a good teacher, or I'm a bad parent, for example. People can be aware or unaware of their mindsets, according to Dweck, but they can have a profound effect on learning achievement, skill acquisition, personal relationships, professional success, and many other dimensions of life. So let's look a little deeper. In a fixed mindset, people believe that the basic qualities like their intelligence or talent are simply fixed traits. They spend their time documenting their intelligence or talent instead of developing it. They also believe that talent alone creates success without effort. So if you have somebody who has a fixed mindset and you ask them why they got an A on their test or whatever it is, they might say, well, I just got lucky, right? Or I just knew it. The fact of the matter is that there's more going on here than meets the eye. Now, the question I have for you is, how many of us, if you can perceive this in your secondary school experience, how many of you went through your education with this particular point of view embedded in your school of thought? That either I have the skill to do something or I don't. I've got the math card, I don't. I've got the writing card, I don't. Yeah. So somehow or other, it's very easy that the fixed mindset gets perpetuated. And I think the students need to, or deserve, our checking into it a little bit more. Again, this would be a math phobic's nightmare, right? I mean, good grief. I'm not going to make it through the pearly gates. Now, in a growth mindset, people believe that their most basic abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work. Brains and talent are just the starting point. This view creates a love of learning and a resilience that is essential for great accomplishments. So in the growth mindset, there's a lot of positivity that comes from this. Students who embrace themselves, embrace growth mindsets, the belief that they can learn more or become smarter if they work hard, and persevere may learn more, learn more quickly, and view challenges and failures or setbacks as opportunities to improve their learning and skills. So how many of you would say that this was a pervasive view in your own educational experience in secondary school? Probably a lot fewer than in the fixed mindset, because that seems to be more of an undercurrent of how things go in secondary school. So this deserves a little bit more of an insight. Now, some points to consider regarding these mindsets. First of all, they're not stable characteristics. In other words, you can have a growth mindset in one area, but a fixed mindset in another. So it's not all or nothing, right? I mean, you can have a growth mindset in learning a musical instrument, as somebody said, versus trying to solve a math problem. Also, what creates a fixed mindset is students who have been compared to others, siblings, students, relatives. This may encourage more of a fixed mindset. So I'm not as smart as my sister, or et cetera, right? We also know that as teachers, we need to develop our own growth mindsets for teaching, because we're always learning. And having a growth mindset, once you get into the classroom, is something that we intentionally have to keep after. This is where our professional growth and expertise continues to develop over that 50 or so year period that I call your career of teaching. And then we'll also need to understand how to cultivate a growth mindset culture. Feel-good strategies are not enough, but there are ways in which we can engage students that will create levels of motivation that are more intrinsic and more intense, and with that comes a growth mindset. Part of that is developing collaborative environments that support students, help foster growth mindset, and also, as a byproduct, enhance more intrinsic motivation. So I started diving into this because it interested me that, and I took some workshops with Carol Dweck, and there's a lot of, for lack of a better word, vagueness to what exactly it looks like. And so I tried to come up with some ways of addressing the issues around developing a growth mindset through some protocols that I developed, and we're going to be looking at those in the next few minutes. So if you would grab your reader, and we're going to open it up to page 24. So what I was interested in was how to get at the idea of a growth mindset, but in order to kind of pave the way for a growth mindset, you more or less have to find an entry point to get into the issue. And this, I think, is oftentimes what's missing in a lot of instances. So the article called Two Sides of a Coin, Using Risk Assessment to Promote a Growth Mindset, is what I'm going to be explaining. The article is here as a reference, but I want to take you through the protocols and talk a bit more about how they work, okay? And these protocols will be posted in Canvas, but you have them also in hard copy in your reader. So if you would flip to page 30, and we'll get ready to look at page 30. Risk assessment is defined as a process of evaluating the potential risks that may be involved in a projected activity or undertaking. Now, the parts or the components of risk assessment include identifying any potential hazards or barriers, determining who is involved and who might be harmed, evaluating risks and measures, and implementations of any findings that we can now somehow change the direction or change the course, and then assessing and updating the strategy. So I use these protocols with my grade 12 plus kids, but I think it'll apply to any secondary grade level. So I want to walk you through how they work. And again, this is about trying to figure out some of the risks that kids have academically in terms of what hindrances they may find. Because once you establish that baseline, then you can begin to work on the growth mindset. Okay? So on page 30, you'll see the starting point. Now, this is done in the first couple of weeks of school, and you're way beyond that now if you're student teaching, but I, like a lot of information in here, I give it to you to put in your bank so that when you're ready to hit your own classroom, you can pull these out and hopefully we'll be able to use them and find them useful. In the event that you can use them now, then so much the better. But I know that when you're student teaching, you're sort of at the mercy of your mentor teacher. So it kind of depends on where you are with that. All right, so the first thing we do then is something you've seen before called an anticipation guide. And the idea behind the anticipation guide is to pop the lid open on some of their thinking about what it means to be smart. So what we have them do is I read the statement to them, and they put a check mark if they agree and put an X if they disagree. So the first statement reads, people are either smart or they're not. You can determine that to be a fixed mindset statement. Number 2 says, even though people may practice something, they may not really show improvement. And then number 3, people who try, even if they fail, are more likely to succeed later. So you kind of see the temper of where these probes or these statements go. And then what we'll do is we'll have the students respond in writing, indicating in the spaces below, 1, 2, and 3, why they either agreed or why they disagreed. And then we have a class discussion. And the class discussion is basically a survey with responses. So how many people agree with statement number 1? People are either smart or they're not. Interesting, my class was 50-50 on this, which I thought was interesting. I thought it would be more of a fixed mindset group. They were about 50-50, which was interesting. And then the same, actually all these were pretty 50-50. Second statement, even though people may practice something, they may not really show improvement. Well, here again, some of the students said, well, you may not show improvement right away, but if you're a soccer player and you're going to keep practicing soccer, as one kid said, you may suck initially, but you might be better off later. So again, it's an interesting discussion that we had, and it sort of unlocks their thinking about, who's smart, who isn't, what does smart mean. I thought it was really insightful. And then at the bottom, we had them draw a picture of what you think it means to be smart. And a lot of kids drew different things. They drew brains. They drew brains with glasses. They drew books, computers, all different kinds of things. But it was really an interesting discussion, and we had them share what they drew, just to get an idea of what people's perceptions are. I thought it was an interesting procedure. And yeah, Taylor, this would work great with Avid, but I think it also works pretty much with anybody. So, but it'd be interesting to hear your feedback. Now, the next thing we do, which is probably a little bit unusual, if you turn to page 31, is I have them write a letter applying to be in my class. And the letter has 3 components. The first one is, what are your qualifications to be a part of this class? In other words, what it means is, what can you contribute to the class? Number 2 is, what is your idea of success and good performance in this class? And number 3 is, what are some things that I, the teacher, need to know about you? And this is a really interesting thing because the kids were really into, first of all, trying to impress me because they thought I was going to hire them or something. But it really lets me get an insight in terms of what kinds of attributes or lack thereof that they share with the class, what their idea of success, in other words, what's in your mind in terms of what it means to be successful in this class, which is something that I'm sure a lot of kids don't spend time thinking about. So I want to unlock that thought. And then some things that I need to know for my students included, I don't like talking in front of people. I live with 2 other families and I don't have a lot of time to study because I have no privacy. 2, I work 30 hours a week. Different things that inform me about some of their life circumstances and some of their fears. And so it was a pretty insightful piece of writing they did. And the other thing is that it gave me a good writing sample of their writing ability. So it was helpful there as well. And again, it's interesting because, kids are not used to being asked these questions. And I'm very much of the school of thought that one thing is that's missing for a lot of our secondary students, particularly important for our struggling students, our strategic students, is a lot of self-reflection, about how they see themselves in the milieu of school. And I want to somehow create some more self-reflection about that. Okay, if you'll turn to page 32. Now, before we get into that, I want to explain something. With page 32, what I like to do is after they respond, I like to have a class discussion about some of the aspects, because this notion of intersubjectivity, where people come to know what others have in mind and how they adjust accordingly, is an important idea in terms of students realizing that they're not alone in the mix. It gives them an opportunity to have shared experiences that are brought out, commonalities, and allow students to engage in a groupthink about how to not only be aware of these shared risks, but also allows for students to derive strategies from others that might be helpful. So we're diving into some territory that's heretofore probably not addressed in most classes, but I think it bears thinking, because when we come together as a class in that sense of community, we have to understand that we all have some common struggles that we share, that not everybody is in a good position here. And so I think there's a lot of safety for students in doing so. So on page 32, there are 5 questions here, and we have them respond, and then we hold a class discussion. So the first one is, what might be some action you need to take to be successful in this class? Now, this is a wide open question. It can be anything from as simple as showing up to I need to complete my assignments. I need to make sure that I study. This is wide open. I mean, you can get any kind of response here. There's no wrong answer here, okay? And then once we start looking at that as a template, then we go into another end of it, which is that other side of the coin, which is what are some possible barriers or obstacles to your having good performance? And here again, we find out some things about our students that are sometimes revealing. Some of my students will say, one of my barriers is I'm not a good reader, or I'm not a good writer, or I don't know English too well, or something like that. Then it could be, too, that, I'm living with 2 other families, I have no privacy, I have no time, whatever it might happen to be. We just want to dive into some of their conditions around that issue. And then number 3, what might be a personal effect if you're underperforming? In other words, if you didn't have a good performance, how would it affect you personally? Do you have a personal stake in being successful? We just want to unlock that thought. And then number 4, there are other people that are involved in their experience. So who are people who might be affected by your underperforming? Now here we get my parents, my sister, my brother, my friends. What I want them to do is to think in terms of, there are a lot of people that are responsible for putting them in that chair in your classroom. So who are those people that might have a stake in their students being able to perform? It's an interesting type of question. And again, their kids are not used to being asked these kinds of questions. So then, who are the people who might be affected by your underperforming? And then number 5, how can you control any risks or obstacles that might challenge your performance? So now that you've kind of outlined some of the risks, what are some possible strategies that you could share that might offset some of the risk. And here we again get into discussions where that groupthink is important because, hearing the students say what they do to overcome an obstacle might trigger a thought for another student. So these are the three instruments that we use toward the beginning of the semester or the school year. And again, this gives me some insight in terms of where the kids are coming from. And then we work through these during the course of the semester or the year to try to offset, but we also have to self-assess. Now, if you turn to page 33, this is another type of reflection or self-assessment and self-evaluation. So this would be given out if I give, let's say that I'm giving a cumulative test, whether it's a unit test or an essay or something, different for different classes. So I want them to rate how they did. So on a Likert scale, I want you to rate your performance from 1 needs to improve, 3 average, 5 great. Now, probably a lot of kids will put 3s and 4s. It doesn't matter. What matters is that they're thinking about it. And that's the thinking that I'm trying to generate here. Then, number 2, what are some of the steps that led to the result of your performance? So some people who might have gotten A's or B's said, well, the steps were I studied and reviewed my notes, or I talked with other people, whatever it might happen to be. If they got a poor performance, one step might be that I didn't study or I didn't take it seriously or whatever they might happen to say. And then the third question is, what would you do differently before your next performance? Okay, so if I got an A, I might do nothing differently. If I got a C or a D, then maybe I'll figure out some ways that I can get better. Reviewing the information, studying more, or reviewing notes, talking with people. And again, these are ideas that will percolate and give kids some strategies and a sense of, hey, I am in control of this after all. Number 4 says, what are some possible barriers that you feel you can't control? Again, working 30 hours a week, living with 2 or 3 other families, not being able to go to study, not having internet access sometimes. All these different factors come into play. And then we want to share some ideas here. So what's the strategy that someone used to be successful in his or her own personal performance? So who can share something that you did that made you successful here? And then let's make a note of this, because this is where you might get an idea about being able to generate more success. So again, this would be done after not a quiz or something like that, but a larger assignment where there's more scaffolding, more instruction that gets to it. Now, in the middle of the semester or the middle of the year, we conduct a review. And so we pull out the documents that we brought in earlier, those 3 papers at the beginning of the year, parts 1, 2, and 3, and we hand it to them. We have them look it over, and we have them review their application letter. So the first question is, after reading your application letter, how would you say that you're meeting your qualifications? In other words, are you actually living up to what you said you were going to be doing? Number 2 says, after reading the risk assessment form, which is that second paper, what are some of the areas of risk or challenges that you still face regarding this class? So again, we wanted to contextualize it in terms of, where are any problems occurring that you might see with regard to our class? There may be none in some cases, which is great, and we want them to articulate that. Number 3 says, what do you feel are some areas that you still need to strengthen in order to get the best performance? Again, stimulating the idea of a growth mindset. What can I do better to get better? Okay. And then number 4, what are some areas where you're feeling very strong regarding your performance? So we again, the last 2 questions move them into more of a growth mindset. And that's kind of the progression that we want them to take. And then we do a final risk analysis at the end of the semester, where we go back to these and revisit them, and we wrap everything up. So in other words, what is your definition of success in this class? Has it changed from the first definition that you made? Number 2, why were you or were you not successful in this class? Number 3, what did you learn about yourself as a student? Number 4, what might others, friends, family, classmates, think about your performance during the course of the semester? So if you got a great performance, everybody's going to be happy. If you didn't do so well, then you may get a different reaction from people who have a stake in your being in school. And then the last thing is number 5, what would you do to eliminate any risk of failure or underperformance in your next class? So this is a risk assessment. It's done intermittently. We do it at the start of the semester. But again, if you have an option to implement some of this now and you want to give it a try and collect feedback, then that would be great. So what the students wrote was kind of interesting. The students wrote, I need to keep focused, I need to stay on track, and not let little things sidetrack me. Looking at my application letter was a big OMG. I forgot all about it. Now this was a student who did really well. Looking back at it was a bit scary, but I wouldn't change a thing. I will probably write my own for the next class I take, just to look back. I think I accomplished a lot. Missing class is one of the main reasons I have to change in order to be successful. Overall, I believe my work habits have changed a lot in a positive way. And if I keep that up, I will keep on succeeding. I learned that I need to take my time and really think about the problems I have with my assignments. I learned that I'm way more capable of things than I believed. It would be a shift in mindset there, right? I believe that I was successful in the class because I learned how to write an essay. I was able to finish 2 editions of the book. So this was a young lady who we were reading the novel, Unwind. I told everybody if they finished before the deadline, I'd buy them the second one. So she finished the first one and got the second one. A lot of my students, even though it was junior college, had not had experience in being able to write an actual essay in their high school experience. So we went through that. I'm going to share the protocol with you later in the semester because it was very successful. And then the last one, I wasn't successful because I got all the work done, but I need to work on time management. I can get anything done. I just have to focus. So again, these can be very revealing in terms of, how we guide kids through this thinking process and go from there. Okay. And again, the article on page 24 gives you some insight in terms of how it worked out. And again, the purpose here is to move kids into establishing the idea of a growth mindset. Okay, any comments on the protocols that you would like to share?
Professor, when you are talking of page 32, 33, how much time you give for those assignments?
Well, I would say if you have them fill it out and do discussion, it's probably at least a half an hour. And for 33, 33 is different because 33 occurs after you've given them an assessment or some project or something where you want them to reflect. So it would be a lot shorter because it's more personal. The only ones that you really share out in this one are number 5 to try to collect some ideas about kids who did well, were able to, what they did to overcome any problems.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
I have one comment to do. My daughter, I was so blessed that she was smart, but every time that people told her, "Oh, you are so smart," she gets so angry, really angry. It was no liking. Yes, she said, "I'm not smart. I have to work hard, and I haven't sleep at night, and I have to read a lot. I'm not smart." She really gets so mad when people give that compliment that, "Oh, you are so smart." She really gets mad.
Yeah, well, maybe there's a lot of pressure there, and there's a lot of stigma too to kids being considered smart, particularly in secondary schools, because a lot of kids get castigated for being quote smart, so it's added pressure that they don't need. But anyway, I thought the inventory would be helpful, and it's there for you should you ever have a chance to use it. And if you do, let me know how it worked out. I found it to be really insightful for my students. And again, it can be used at any grade level. You may have to do a bit more explanation about the prompts per se, but I found it to be really interesting, and my students got a lot out of it. Okay. So we're going to have our IQ karaoke. So if you grab your IQ, and the article is called Putting Students on the Path to Learning. We'll take the first 5 people to sign up in the chat. So I'll open up the chat, and let's see who's coming down. Okay, we have room for 1 or maybe 2 more if you're interested. Giselle. Okay, very good. So we have our 5. Now, before we get started, how many of you, let me just sort of ask this question. It's a little controversial, so just bear with me. How many people found that elements of this article run a little counter to some of the other education courses you've had or are having? Yeah. Let's talk about that for a second. I see 3 people are up. Let me start with Marisol, and then I'll go to Leah and Karen.
I don't think you can.
I'm glad you're out of your car.
Really quick. Can you hear me now?
A little louder. Can you say it again?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we're good. We're good.
Okay, so some of the stuff that I sort of found to sort of counter some of the things that we've learned in some of my other classes is, like, one thing in particular that I actually noticed on this most recent reading was that they talked about how a lot of teachers tend to sort of ignore the evidence about with the minimal guidance, less guided versus more guided.
Yeah, the partial versus more, yeah.
Yeah. In a lot of my other classes, I would say none of my other classes, I haven't heard anyone sort of acknowledge that, about how a lot of educators tend to ignore that. And something that I wrote in my IQ, I know that I'm not sharing my IQ, is that I feel like for some educators, and this is something that I haven't really noticed being acknowledged in some of my classes, is that I kind of feel like it's a matter of just trying to make their lives easier, and just wanting to do or to put in less work than necessary, even though it's hurting the students.
And so that was just something that I sort of like thought of.
Yeah. Okay. Certainly, that can be part of it. We'll dive into that a bit more deeply too. So I'm glad you brought that up. Leah, you had a hand up too, and then we'll go to Karen.
Yes. So I found this really interesting because a lot of the classes that I've taken have really spoke on, well, I don't want to get it mixed up with student-centered learning, but they've really focused on more of a constructivist kind of theory. And when I was reading this, and it's funny because some of the questions that came up, I was like, whoa, I've already thought about this. One of those was, well, what if they go down the wrong path? What if they go down the wrong path? Are they going to remember that way that they went to get to that answer? Or are they going to, remember the correct way? So I always I felt personally that there's some direct instruction, it seems to be a lot of times is kind of demonized as like, don't do that. They don't just need to sit and hear you talk, but it's not talking. It's teaching them the correct way to do things. And I know that's kind of a simplified way to put it because there's definitely a lot of things that go in that, but it's just so funny because that we read this today because I was just thinking about this maybe like last week, and I was like, I don't want to, just do direct instruction, but I don't want them to go down the wrong path to learning the information that they are trying to give them.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you for that. And Karen, I think you had a hand up too.
Yes, for me it was basically the same as what Leah was saying, where in most of my classes we've talked about students being directly involved in their educational process of learning, and I do believe in a balance of direct instruction and also letting students struggle through whatever they're learning, because I feel in my personal experience that more of the information is retained when a student struggles through a problem or goes through that struggle process in their mind. So that is having minimal, what do they say? Minimal guidance. Yeah, that to me was a little too extreme for me.
Okay. All right, good. Thank you. So that kind of opens the door for some of the ideas we're going to share in our IQ karaoke. So thank you, guys. Okay, Cassandra, you're on stage now. Come on down. And would you do me a favor and share the page number with us so we can all turn to it?
Sure. My first quote is from page 93.
You give us a second to find it here. By the way, I should tell you that I like to use this article because I like the controversy. So you probably figured that out already. Okay, whereabouts on page 93 are we?
Bottom right. It's the last paragraph.
Okay.
So some researchers have noted that when students learn science in classrooms with peer discovery methods or minimal feedback, they often become lost and frustrated, and their confusion can lead to misconceptions. And I wrote, when students are told to think about a concept before they are taught the actual lesson, it leads to frustration, confusion, because it is something that they're not used to. The students are so used to teachers always giving them the answers or the methods that they're supposed to be using to answer the questions that are given to them. So because this is something new, they may express frustration in class. However, I do believe that we, I put students, but we as teachers must use this as something positive. We must cause frustration sometimes so that they can show us what they are thinking and that they are engaged with the lesson, right? If there's no frustration, then they're probably dozing off somewhere else.
Oh.
So we must remind them that they will not always get the answer handed to them, so they must try various ways to achieve the answer before giving up completely. And we must get students out of the habit of expecting the answer as soon as they say, I don't know and I don't get it. Like giving them a chance to just try it at first.
Yeah. How many of you ask a question and the kids say, I don't know? Anybody ever have that happen to you? Yeah, all the time, right? So one of the ways that I scaffold that was in framing the question, I put up 3 possible answers. And I asked the kids to either in discussion or on their own, try to figure out which one would be the best one and explain why. And that's with the assumption that they have enough information stored in the spider webs to be able to address it. One of the things that I take away from this article, particularly for our more novice students, is sort of the question that I beg is, if I want my students to discover something, what do they need to know in order to make the discovery? Because they don't have enough prior knowledge to make any kind of deduction. This is when they get frustrated and they give up. And they wait for the teacher to give the answer because they know that we will, right? So again, there's a process piece in here that we have to consider. And again, the question is, for my more novice students, if I want them to make, for lack of a better word, to make a discovery or whatever you want to call it, or come up with an answer, what are the antecedent things they need to know in order to get there? And if that's missing, then we're going to see either frustration or they're going to wait for you to tell them the answer, which we always do. Okay? All right, thank you. Okay, next we have on our stage tonight is Elizabeth Sheffield. The mic is yours.
Thank you. Mine is on page 95, and it's just under the big chunk of text that, like, the on the left side of the page.
Okay.
And it's altogether, the results suggest that expert problem solvers derive their skill by drawing on the extensive experience stored in their long-term memory in the form of concepts and procedures known as mental schemas. And the reason for why I picked this quote is because it kind of ties into our other, like, quick write readings that we have been doing, where we were talking about how in order for retention and engagement to happen, it's like the spiderweb effect, where the more that you engage with the material, the more likely you are to become a expert in the field. And I just thought that this was a really good reminder yet again that, like, if just because you've learned something once doesn't mean you understand it, but once you have, like, switched it from your working memory to your long-term memory and you're, like, continually being asked to recall the information, reassessing your knowledge and, like, using it to solve different problems, that's how you become an expert in whatever the information is that you're talking about. And in order to create those expert problem solvers, we have to be able to create that background experience, and we can't just throw the novices into, like, a problem-solving situation and expect them to flourish. Like, we have to be able to give them that schema and, like, show them the steps in order for them to call upon that information later on so that they can become experts in that information.
Yeah, so the idea that you're expressing here is that we want them to take previously learned information and be able to apply it, right? And in that application is where the discovery lies. So if they have the background knowledge where the spider webs are rattling, the long-term memory is, and again, this is the developmental process. So when we think about leading up to a cumulative task where we engage them in some sort of discovery, the question is, now that you've learned information X, how do you apply it to scenario Y, right? And that's kind of where this is going. So what we need to think about are the gaps that novice students have in that we need to fill in order to get them to the point where they can make the discovery, for lack of a better way of putting it, rather than just throwing something at them and and having them engage in that level of frustration that kills motivation right away, right? So this is, again, that developmental sequential idea, because the knowledge that we're teaching is built on something else. And as we lay those foundational bricks, we can then get into the higher order parts of where we want them to go with the information. And I think that, like somebody said, the direct instruction takes a hit, but direct instruction as needed. Direct instruction can be, when we think about direct instruction, the connotation is probably lecture. But as we've seen, lecture has elements of active learning that you can build into it. So it isn't just about direct instruction, blah, 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 talking at them, but it's having them engage in something where they get guided practice. You've heard the mantra in the education department, I do, we do, you do. And that same kind of sequence is part of it. So the direct instruction is where I'm giving guidance. And again, it can be partial or it can be minimal depending upon the need of the students, or it can be direct and explicit in terms of the amount. But again, this is where I have to assess where my students are in order to get them comfortable. And really it's about baby steps to get them to the point where they can engage in that larger application of the content and the information. Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. Now we go to Daniel.
Hi, Professor. So the quote that I picked was a short one, but I built upon it. So it's on page 94 on the top page, where it says on the left-hand side of the page, top paragraph, in real classrooms, several problems occur when different kinds of minimally guided instructions are used. So I kind of I didn't want to add the whole paragraph because I wanted to give my two cents to what I was going to talk about. And so I just wrote that this quote really begins to explain further the downfall or negative results to this teaching strategy. According to the course reader, it states that only the students who are the brightest/best prepared will be successful. Not to mention how the rest of the students who may be left behind will only find themselves frustrated. And I would assume that it will also become unmotivated. And it talks about, like, it further goes into like different negative results about that teaching strategy. But mainly what I wanted to focus on was specifically if the students have minimal instruction and it's kind of vague, right? Oftentimes I've seen, at least with the 8th graders that I teach, they can quickly get frustrated and they'll just shut down, right? They'll put their head down, and then sometimes they'll even give you attitude, or they might attempt the assignment just to make you happy, but really they'll give minimal effort. And so I figure that oftentimes if you make the instruction crystal clear and just kind of even simplify it even further to where you get that aha moment, like, oh, okay, this is all you're asking for, mister? Like, this is pretty easy. Like, okay, like, why do you got to make it sound so complicated, right? I've found the best results that way, right? Where students actually feel confident enough to further proceed with the assignment and, be engaged at the end of the day, rather than not understand what the assignment is and just not want to do it because they'll simplify it as, oh, this is too hard, or, oh, I'll do it at home, right? Yeah.
The other interesting part about that paragraph was where it says that even if a student is wrong, they're likely to hang on to that answer. And I remember reading an editorial out of, a professor wrote it out of UC Riverside. It was a biology class. And she was focused on migration patterns of birds. And she was talking with this one student who was complaining about her grade on the test. And the student was so convinced that she was right about her responses, as the instructor said, even though she's actually, the way that she saw this change the entire migration pattern for a whole species of birds, she was totally wrong, but she wouldn't buy into it. And so sort of leads to that idea that, they're so convinced they make the discovery and that they hang on to it, and sometimes they won't see the other way of looking at it. Okay, thank you, Daniel. Okay, now we're going to go to Kate.
Hi. I was actually going to do the same quote as Daniel, but I'm going to do page 94 towards the bottom right-hand corner. So it was, in order to really comprehend why full instructional guidance is more effective and efficient than partial or minimal guidance for novices, we need to know how human brains learn. There are two essential components, long-term and working memory. And then I just put, an ellipsis to continue, and I wanted to build on because I said that this passage was important to me because it reminded me of the why students forget quick write we did earlier in the semester. And I remembered that it was important to follow different learning strategies in order to minimize the forgetting curve that it mentioned. And I thought about this article because of the instructional approaches that takes into consideration both the long-term memory and the working memory, which also can help us incorporate UDL. And I remember the prior article mentioning too that the more connections neurons have, the other neurons, the stronger the memory is. And so it's essential for us to apply different strategies to be able to know the balance between guided instruction and partially guided instruction. Basically, like when to use it, because I feel like it could be essential in one period to have guided instruction, but also it might not work in your other classes too.
Yeah, this is why we have to know where our students are, and if we have students that they typify as being more novice students, then we know that we need to create more scaffolding and more building up to the major points that we want them to learn. And direct instruction and group guided instruction is actually part of direct instruction. So when kids are engaged in discussion with each other, that can very easily be a part of guided instruction. We'll break that down further as we get through the semester too. So that's a good point. And I like your connection to the previous. You're kind of seeing a pattern here, aren't you, in terms of the readings that we're doing? Yeah, there's obviously a lot of connections here. Okay, thank you, Kate. Now we're going to go to Giselle.
Hello. So the quote that I chose is also on page 94. It's also on the right-hand side toward the end. The second to last paragraph towards the end says, learning requires a construction of knowledge. Withholding information from students does not facilitate the construction of knowledge. And the reason why I chose this quote is just because, I 100% believe what it says. I know that it was mentioned that, sometimes, students wait for teachers to give them the answer. But I feel like sometimes, these kids need to be handheld, and it's kind of frustrating sometimes, but it just means that as a teacher, we have to deconstruct lesson plans, or if we're teaching similes or metaphors, they have to be deconstructed well for students to be able to learn. And if we are only partially trying to teach them, that's where we also kind of withhold that knowledge. So I guess a way that this can be used, being able to give students the knowledge that they need, is through what from my perspective is the gradual release of responsibility, where students are their hand is held through the beginning of a lesson, and then of course with their classmates, and then with themselves. And it's not necessarily withholding knowledge, but towards the end they should already have the knowledge of a certain assignment or an essay or a quiz or a lesson plan overall.
Good point. So we have to know where they are in order to get them to where we want them to be. For example, like you mentioned, essay. So my students in my community college class, right out of high school, could not write an essay to save their lives. So what is the point of assigning an essay unless I teach them how to do an essay? So they were novice essay writers, and my job was to make them expert essay writers. And so that's part of the idea behind understanding where they are as novices versus experts. A lot of times we assume that kids are experts in terms of being able to sort of make some sort of discovery or come up with an answer on their own when they're not quite there. And so they develop a lot of coping strategies to offset some of that frustration. Now, there's another interesting point that I wanted to bring up here in the article that mentions a lot of our novice students prefer minimal guidance versus direct instruction. What do you think is going on there? Any thoughts on that?
Maybe they might feel a little bit more independent if they're doing like their assignments and having partial instruction, because I understand that like direct instruction can also be exhausting, not just for the teacher but for the student.
Yep.
And it's just like the attention of an adult is of course much more like longer than a kid's attention, but then again, like, you know, people do need breaks every now and then, so like that's where probably why they prefer partial instruction, because they like that independence.
Okay, yeah, and again, it feels more liberating because they don't have to attend to direct instruction, because direct instruction is harder work for them, because eventually they're going to get an answer one way or another, right? Either from another student or the teacher will eventually tell them the answer. All right, so they know that they can skirt around that idea, but really, are they able to retain it? That's one element of the article that really caught my attention. The other one that wasn't mentioned, but I think is important, is the notion of the worked sample or the worked example. Anybody care to talk about that? Yes, Karen.
It's super important to provide students with an example of what it is that you're asking them to do. And at first, yeah, you're going to have to sit and baby step them through it. You're going to tell them that they're going to write you a 5-page paper, but they're not going to do it for you until like week 6. And each week, you're going to work on just one small portion so that they can see that, one, when you break something down into a small piece, it's easily managed. 2, you build on the skills so that then when you have them do it completely on their own, they're like, okay, what did we do the first time?
Yeah.
Okay, do that. And they have a framework to go on. But I had an experience in high school with math. I struggled. It was hard. But I had teachers that expected me to just grasp this idea that there was new math and shortcuts. And I was clearly struggling. In one class, I was getting a D, and the teacher refused to use the old methods in order to help me understand the math.
Yeah.
So I actually had to go to a friend and say, hey, I don't get it. And the interesting thing is that the semester prior, I had a math teacher who made us write out every step of the problem every time we did it. And in that class, I got an A on the final and an A in the class because I was able to see a worked sample. I was able to visually see exactly what was expected and the thought process behind each step in the math. And it made all the difference.
So whether it's an essay or a math problem or something, kids need to see a finished product so that they know the target, but also an explanation of the processes that it takes to get there without assuming that just by showing it to them, they now know what it is. So I think the article is helpful in terms of describing situations. And again, I know it's a little bit, I don't know, controversial maybe, for lack of a better word, in relation to some of the other things you're learning, but keep it close to your vest and take it for what it's worth. Okay. All right. So at the end of class, you'll drop your IQs into the IQ folder, and we're going to go ahead and move on here. Thank you all for the karaoke. Remember, you have 2 required karaokes for the semester. Well, now you get a brain break. Are you ready? The worst jokes you've ever heard. Here we go. Ned, I came down with a sore throat today. Yeah, Ned, what did the doctor say? Ned, he said I was down to 1 horsepower. Oh, terrible joke. Ned, hey, I hear that when the lockdown was lifted, the Lego store reopened. Ned, were a lot of people there? Ned, they were lined up for blocks. Oh, bad jokes. Okay, we're going to end tonight with a little talk, and as we kind of move into an understanding about the clientele, this will tie in with the Quick Ride 2 for next week. So I think you'll enjoy this, and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
I have spent my entire life either at the schoolhouse, on the way to the schoolhouse, or talking about what happens in the schoolhouse. Both my parents were educators. My maternal grandparents were educators. And for the past 40 years, I've done the same thing. And so needless to say, over those years, I've had a chance to look at education reform from a lot of perspectives. Some of those reforms have been good. Some of them have been not so good. And we know why kids drop out. We know why kids don't learn. It's either poverty, low attendance, negative peer influences. We know why. But one of the things that we never discuss, or we rarely discuss, is the value and importance of human connection. Relationships. James Comer says that no significant learning can occur without a significant relationship. George Washington Carver says all learning is understanding relationships. Everyone in this room has been affected by a teacher or an adult. For years, I have watched people teach. I have looked at the best and I've looked at some of the worst. A colleague said to me one time, they don't pay me to like the kids. They pay me to teach a lesson. The kids should learn it. I should teach it. They should learn it. Case closed. Well, I said to her, you know, kids don't learn from people they don't like. She said, that's just a bunch of hooey. And I said to her, well, your year is going to be long and arduous, dear. Needless to say, it was. Some people think that you can either have it in you to build a relationship or you don't. I think Stephen Covey had the right idea. He said you ought to just throw in a few simple things, like seeking first to understand as opposed to being understood. Simple things like apologize. You ever thought about that? Tell a kid you're sorry, they're in shock. I taught a lesson once on ratios. I'm not real good with math, but I was working on it. And I got back and looked at that teacher edition. I taught the whole lesson wrong. So I came back to class the next day and I said, look, guys, I need to apologize. I taught the whole lesson wrong. I'm so sorry. I said, that's okay, Miss Pearson. You were so excited. We just let you go. I have had classes that were so low, so academically deficient that I cried. I wondered, how am I going to take this group in 9 months from where they are to where they need to be? And it was difficult. It was awfully hard. How do I raise the self-esteem of a child and his academic achievement at the same time? One year I came up with a bright idea. I told all my students, you were chosen to be in my class because I am the best teacher and you are the best students. They put us all together so we could show everybody else how to do it. One of the students said, really? I said, really? We have to show the other classes how to do it. So when we walk down the hall, people will notice us. So you can't make noise. You just have to strut. And I gave him a saying to say, I am somebody. I was somebody when I came. I'll be a better somebody when I leave. I am powerful and I am strong. I deserve the education that I get here. I have things to do, people to impress, and places to go. And they said, yeah. You say it long enough, it starts to be a part of you. And so I gave a quiz, 20 questions. Student missed 18. I put a +2 on this paper and a big smiley paper. He said, Miss Pearson, is this an F? I said, yeah. He said, then why'd you put a smiley face? I said, because you on the road. You got 2 right, you didn't miss them all. I said, and when we review this, won't you do better? He said, yes, ma'am, I can do better. You see, -18 sucks all the life out of you. +2 said, I ain't all bad. For years, I watched my mother take the time at recess to review, go on home visits in the afternoon, buy combs and brushes and peanut butter and crackers to put in her desk drawer for kids that needed to eat, and a washcloth and some soap for the kids who didn't smell so good. See, it's hard to teach kids who stink. And kids can be cruel. And so she kept those things in her desk, and years later, after she retired, I watched some of those same kids come through and say to her, you know, Miss Walker, you made a difference in my life. You made it work for me. You made me feel like I was somebody when I knew at the bottom I wasn't. And I want you to just see what I've become. And when my mama died 2 years ago at 92, there were so many former students at her funeral. It brought tears to my eyes, not because she was gone, but because she left a legacy of relationships that could never disappear. Can we stand to have more relationships? Absolutely. Will you like all your children? Of course not. And you know your toughest kids are never absent. Never. You won't like them all, and the tough ones show up for a reason. It's the connection. It's the relationships. And while you won't like them all, the key is they can never, ever know. So teachers become great actors and great actresses, and we come to work when we don't feel like it, and we listen to policy that doesn't make sense, and we teach anyway. We teach anyway because that's what we do. Teaching and learning should bring joy. How powerful would our world be if we had kids who were not afraid to take risks, who were not afraid to think, and who had a champion? Every child deserves a champion, an adult who will never give up on them, who understands the power of connection and insists that they become the best that they can possibly be. Is this job tough? You betcha. Oh God, you betcha. But it is not impossible. We can do this. We're educators. We're born to make a difference. Thank you so much.
Okay. We're going to be getting into these issues a little bit more over the next few weeks. If you would open up your reader to page 98. You'll see an article that headlines The Motivated Brain.
That's the IQ.
Pardon me?
That's the IQ.
That is the IQ. And that'll be IQ number 5. And I will be emailing you the quick write after class tonight. Okay?
All right.
All right, guys. So I'll be hanging around for a few minutes if anybody has any questions.
All right. Thank you, Professor.
All right. So with that, have a good week. I'll see you at our next broadcast on next Thursday.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Have a good night.
I'm a little upset that we're not doing our.
Yep, that's right, Michael. Good one. You got it.
It stood with me. I introduced it to my class.